Hajime, welcome back, denizens. JT McRoberts here with you. You're watching Comic-Jutsu. It's time for another live stream, and we have a fun topic for discussion for today. Now, I've noticed that these streams are not drawing a lot of views, so I'm not going to pour everything into it. I'm going to try to just kind of cover the bases and move along, because I've discovered that it doesn't matter if I make them really long. They're not drawing a whole lot of views, but I thought this is a fun topic for discussion. Now, I have a few other videos planned for this week, such as celebrating Bruce Lee's birthday, Lee Jung-fan, and I might do like a second part continuation of this, because what we're going to talk about today are first issues, which is a subject near and dear to your heart and mine, being independent creators, I'm going to guess, because if you're planning to work for Marvel or DC or whomever, you're probably not watching this video. You're probably off devouring their books and trying to figure out how you can fit into being a little cog in their giant machine. But for those of you who are out there building your own machine to set loose upon the world, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Comic Book Dojo. We are here for you. And as always, I do invite discussion and feedback and comments, so that I know where to go next with these discussions. So this week I'm doing what I normally do, poking around the interwebs, and I come across a post by the illustrious Ron Marz, former writer of Green Lantern, some other things. Honestly, he's never been a favorite of mine. He's really kind of stuck in that science fiction trope. You know, none of his work felt very mythic to me, and I prefer my superhero works to really have a touch of the mythic. I mean, sometimes you can ground them a bit more in reality, but the true power is when you can figure out how to unlock the mythos behind them. So without further ado, let me show you the post in question that I'm talking about. So I'm going to flip the camera around right quick, and we will show you. Here you go, Ron Marz. And I even took a picture of it so I can show it to you a little bit closer up. Just read a #1 issue of a superhero comic, and boy, I think we need to chat about what a #1 issue should be. Excite me, give me a reason to care, dazzle me visually, make me want to come back for issue 2. Everybody standing around talking is ... not that. Okay, he continues with part 2. Now, where's my part 2? You get one chance to get a hook into the reader and get them to come back for more. If you blow it, they're gone. A first issue is a precious gift and a huge responsibility. Don't waste it. I won't be back for #2 because of the lack of simple craft, and that's a bummer. I saw a response to that from Jim Zub here. I'm seeing a lot of this too. First issues that don't introduce the characters or core conflict well. First issues that meander instead of justifying their existence. First issues that don't feel special at all. A wasted opportunity that damages trust with readers. So, interesting take from those guys. They are, of course, accomplished in the field. You know, what am I but just an independent guy working on my own graphic novel. But, you know, I've been reading comic books since I was a tot. And that's where my understanding of all this comes from. And one of the fun things I like to do from time to time when I'm working on something, especially if it's a first issue, you know, type of story, I'll actually go through my collection and pull a lot of first issues. I'll pull good first issues. I'll pull bad first issues. I'll pull mediocre first issues, which is a lot of what's on the stands nowadays. Though at the independent level, there's a lot of spectacular work going on. I mean, it really is amazing Just the multiplicity of great works that are out there that we can find, not from Marvel or DC or even necessarily Image, but from the other tertiary publishers, or at the very independent level with crowdfunding like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or what have you. I mean, you can literally find whatever it is that you're looking for, whatever it is that you're interested in. So I brought this discussion up on the Funny Pages promos page over on FB, and I got some responses, so I thought I'd share a few of them with you. Let me switch this back to where you can see my lovely face once again. Here we are. Hello. Okay, so I got a response from Jerome Cabanatan. I'll say his full name because he's a creator and he has a current Kickstarter running, so maybe you want to check it out. Everyday Black Belter, live on Kickstarter now. Recommend it to you. Honestly, I'm not able to support it this time. I put too much money into Kickstarters over the past few months, and I'm being hardcore pretty much through Christmas into the new year about not devoting all of my money to that. So good luck with your campaign. So he says the first episode of Blue-Eyed Samurai was a great start, talking about on Netflix. I figure in comics the first issue should almost feel like a one-shot with a couple of loose threads. I responded directly to him and said that's a pretty good way to encapsulate it. There was a time when single issues, especially the first issue, really delivered an entire story, if not an entirely new corner of the universe to readers. It gave them some narrative fulfillment and left them enough to want to come back for more. That is, before the dark times of decompressed storytelling. And I'm looking at you, Brian Michael Bendis. Never been a fan of a single work of his. So to me, it's been really dark times for the past few decades, because that dude basically took over and, in my opinion, drove Marvel into the dirt. I thought that decompressed stuff was just plain lazy. I shouldn't have to read 7 issues to get, one story. Now, if those issues were created as an OGN, an original graphic novel, instead of it being presented as 7 separate issues that you have to follow over a year, but given to you in one chunk, then that's the format. I'm much more amenable to reading something like that. Here Jason says, textbook example in a good way of starting off a longer story, setting, suspense, action, establish empathy for the protagonist, a clear mission, and then make me want what they want and more action. Talking again about Blue-Eyed Samurai, which I haven't seen, but I've got it queued up on Netflix, so I'm going to check it out as it was recommended to me, and I'm sharing that recommendation with the denizens of the dojo out there. Mal says, but if you are Marvel, there's always another number 1 for you to try again. And that is very true. And I responded to him kind of that I'm of two minds about that. One, if you have a serialized story that's 400, 500, 1,000 issues in, like we are with Action Comics now, it can be daunting to any sort of new reader, whether they're new to comic books or just new to that character in particular. Okay, if I'm a Marvel reader and I say, man, I want to get into DC, I want to see what's going on with Superman, but they're at issue 1110. Do I have to go back and read all of those others, or can I just jump on in? So, in that sense, if they're actually wrapping up a character arc or a story arc before ending that series and then starting a new number 1 over for people to jump in on, I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, let's give people a new jumping on place. And as an aside to that, I like the legacy numbering that Marvel did a little while back, where a book could have both a number 1 on it, and then it would say, well, legacy numbering is 645, or in the case of like Shang-Chi, one of my favorite characters, issue 126, when they picked up with his stuff and showed that it was a continuation of the story, although they kind of completely threw that character away and changed him totally. But anyway, can't get too far off track. When modern comics relaunch, here Matthew says, when modern comics relaunch with a new number one every 6 months or so, it makes an issue number one pointless. Marvel's new Alien book is their second or third number one this year. It seems like Marvel are afraid to just continue the numbering after a new creative team takes over. Which, I mean, that's a good point. But if they're somebody new, here Matthew responds to what I just said to you guys. I understand that someone is new to comics. They may see a number one issue of a character they have a good passing interest in, then think it's a good jumping on point, but the jaded part of me knows it's a marketing tactic. The big two know that if they launch a new number one, it will sell more than issue number 380, so they repeatedly relaunch books, which is true. That is very true, and they will waste your time. But in all of those instances, I say, let's take it on a case-by-case basis. Was that a good issue number one? If it's not, I'm not going to buy it again. It will be one and done. I might pick it up. And I'm a sucker for number ones. I love to pick up first issues because as a storyteller, we have to start at number one. And, I don't have the luxury of 40, 50, 60 years of Marvel or DC continuity that I can pull from where I can just jump in and say, oh, well, here's my new take on the X-Men or Superman or Batman or Miracle Man, what have you. So I have to figure out, what is the formula for making that first issue work. Here Nick says, I treat all the books I write as one-shots to the point I tell a complete tale in the book. Comic books ain't all fights and tights. Some will hook, some make a royal mess and trade on the book's name. Yes, Transformers, I am looking at you. He's talking about the recent Transformers number one. Okay, here Franco asks, well, going off of that, what are some of the better first issues you guys have read? Off the top of my head, for me, it's the first issues of OMAC, Omega the Unknown, Stray Bullets, The Wade, Samney, Black Widow, and some others. That is a very good question. So I'm actually going to share a look at some first issues that I think are really good, that accomplish, some of the criteria that we're setting out here. I'm going to share them with you. And as a part two to this, I think I'm going to make a video where we actually go in a little bit closer and look at the various pieces of some of these really good first issues and say, okay, well, what made this work? And then, how can we or me apply this to our own work? Up first, Origin of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko, even though those names aren't on there, and of course Marie Severin and some others. But this is a good place to start because it has all of the classic original Marvel characters. And to me, Fantastic Four number one is about as perfect as it gets. And if you compare this to modern Fantastic Four number ones, you'll see why, because you get so much story in what Jack put together from this. Okay, and yeah, I'm gonna say Jack because he's the guy that sat down and broke it down, broke it into beats, even put dialogue into everything that Stan came back and changed over. But we're not going to get into the Stan versus Jack debate at the moment because we know who was sitting at the table putting this baby together. And with any of these first issues, you always have to take them in the context of the time in which they're presented, because approaches to comic books change, audiences change, they become more sophisticated. Like we're in the age now where we have, people think they understand tropes or archetypal storytelling or the hero's journey or what have you, and there are varying levels of understanding of that. But unfortunately, it seems like a lot of that understanding comes from truncated studying. Okay, it's not full knowledge of what those things actually mean. So people will say trope this and trope that, and they think everything is a trope. I mean, and everything is not a trope. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But Fantastic Four 1, the Hulk number 1, Amazing Fantasy number 15. Now, mind you, of course, that's number 15. It's not a first issue, but it's the first Spider-Man story. And you can see the strength in it when it's being retold over and over and over again. That would probably be a good video to do, is just say, hey, let's do all these Spider-Man first issues and take a look at this And you can see how many times that they retold this story and how many pieces are still there. Peter Parker as the high school student you can relate to, with problems that you can relate to. The death of Uncle Ben that gives him, that catalyzes him, and it gives him this moral foundation that he works from. So many elements that no matter how many times this gets retold, like with the horrendous Marvel Ultimate Marvel, which I'm just not a fan of. Because I always knew it was a dead end project. It's like, well, how long are they going to retell these stories? What's it going to lead to, and how's it going to end? And probably the only thing that came out of that was any good was Miles Morales, and he is, even if being a cool character, he's a derivative. So, but that's how we wound up where we are now with this bizarre multiversal continuity. It used to be that Marvel was something that you could really understand and relate to and think like, oh wow, in New York they have all these fantastic superheroes, or I can see these realistic people out there. But now, once we've introduced multiple versions, deaths, rebirths, reincarnations, deals with the devil, they've lost all of that. They've lost all of that relatability, unfortunately. Okay, X-Men here, reprinted as special edition #1, but it was originally giant size #1. The first issue of X-Men by Kirby and Lee is not a great story to me. I mean, the elements introduced are good. Okay, yeah, it does introduce you to a new corner of this world, and the conflict between Professor Xavier and Magneto is great, but that first issue itself is not great. But here, even though this builds upon the past, it is very much a great, archetypal relaunching. And here you go. It's relaunched as a #1, classic X-Men #1. In case you're not familiar with it, great place to join in on it. And that's an interesting project in and of itself, is looking at, this was a modified version, a little bit of a retelling of that original story. This is another modified, slightly. I mean, there's new artwork, new dialogue, new bits of script, new backup story. So it's an interesting project itself, just to compare the different versions of this one story, just like with that Spider-Man #1. Okay, Mark Gruenwald's Squadron Supreme #1, again introduced to an entire world. Now, the problem with these last few I'm showing you is they're not introducing you to new characters. These Squadron Supreme characters, they're derivative of the Squadron Sinister, characters that were introduced originally in the Avengers and so on and so forth. But it's basically, Marvel's Justice League. But this was their first real attempt to introduce you to their world and their concepts. And it's actually a very Watchmen-like book, which for some reason I don't have Watchmen down here. I didn't grab it when I was just grabbing books, and I didn't want to spend all night getting books together for you guys to show you. Man of Steel #1. Again, there's a history to it, a history to the character, but this is interesting in to look at, in that it takes all that history and just kind of sloughs it away and drops away the dead skin and tries to present it in a new way to modern readers. And honestly, this was one of the books that really got me into reading DC Comics, because at the time, I thought Marvel was just they had more relatable characters. The stories were easier to approach. DC just had all this crazy stuff that was left over from the Silver Age. But then, Crisis kind of cleaned a lot of that up. And then it was interesting to see John Byrne's take on representing, the archetypal superhero, Superman, for everyone. Another, originally printed as Swamp Thing #19, but here it is as Essential Swamp Thing #1. Okay, so it works as a first issue, but again, you don't need to know anything about the backstory. It's a great issue, all in and of itself. So great stuff there. There's another one building off of continuity, but introduces a new little corner of their universe. Damage Control #1. Trying to hold these up so they don't shine so much in the camera. Miracle Man #1. Again, here Alan Moore gives his take on the classic Silver Age character. Was he completely Silver Age, or was he actually? It might have been Golden Age, um, the original Marvel Man. Again, you don't need any prior knowledge of this. This was the first Miracle Man book I read. It was one of those series that was recommended to me as, just a great comic book series, and it is a great first issue, even though it reintroduces all of this lore. Now, interesting thing to do, like if you want to build your own universe from the ground up, is give it its own history. That it has its own backstory, that it has its own history of heroes and villains within it. And looking at something like Miracle Man #1 can give you a lot of ideas for how to incorporate that history, but make it all accessible for everyone. Zenith #1 really feels like a Miracle Man kind of rip off, Grant Morrison's first superhero comic work. But it works. I mean, it's good. It introduces the hero, introduces his world, introduces his backstory. So a lot of what I just said about Miracle Man applies to this. And these were originally serialized as well, just like Miracle Man was. Here we go. Jump forward a few more years. Spawn #1. Not a great complete story all in and of itself, but there's enough there that it makes you want to come back for more. Maybe a lot of that is just due to McFarlane's artwork, that you like the dynamism and the energy of McFarlane's fantastic artwork, and or maybe you just like the setup and the kind of the mystery, because it has the little mystery of the power clock or whatever, and of course the art and the coloring is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the coloring in this thing is majestic. At the time it was released, I mean, I thought it was just phenomenal. It was the most gorgeous book on the stands. Okay, so here we go. Invisibles #1. Invisibles #1. Invisibles #1. This is what I was talking about in terms of completing a story arc and then launching a new #1. Like, Morrison planned these 3 volumes this way. Okay, they began with the grenade issue here. This is volume 1. Okay, and this tells their story of anarchy in the UK. Then they pick up with volume 2 here, which is when they take the Invisibles to America. You can see that Ragged Robin is covering her body with the American flag there, Old Glory. And now the interesting twist about the final #1 is this is actually the last issue. It counts down to #1. So issue 12 was actually #1, but I'm showing this just so you understand. All this was planned in advance. But each one of these #1s are completely accessible to readers, to new readers, and they're great jumping on points, except for this one, which wraps up the entire series. So I'm probably just confusing you by showing you that. Here is my signed Alan Moore copy of Supreme #41. This is where he relaunched Supreme as his Superman story. It's his Superman XP. There's the certificate of authenticity. Sorry, I can't speak sometimes. Let me get a sip of my Warlock Pepsi glass here. But again, much like the Miracle Man story of just sloughing away the unused portions of the previous hero's continuity, presenting it as something that's always been and always will be, but then making it new because the main character himself is actually learning about himself and his universe in the book, and that's how readers can join in. Now here, Alan Moore finally makes something original, all of his own, Tom Strong, which is basically encapsulates all of his unused Superman Supreme story ideas, but he made it his own, and that I really loved the entire ABC series. I would much rather see guys like Alan Moore, Grant Morrison making their own versions of these archetypal heroes and presenting them, because it does give us a new look. It does give us something fun and new that's not hampered by all the crazy continuity or the corporate overlords. Now, ironically, immediately bought out by DC. Poor Alan Moore can't catch a break, but that's his karma for some reason. Clive Barker's Ecto Kid #1, maybe a guilty pleasure for me. I don't know. Cool character, cool concept. I heard there were a lot of problems in the creation of it. The creators involved, especially the artist, was not happy with the final results, but it was cool enough to make me want to follow it. Here we go. Probably one of the all-time great superhero Superman stories here in Astro City #1. Again, much like Alan Moore's take on Supreme, or Miracle Man, or Grant Morrison's Zenith. You know, you've got characters with history, but it's all presented in a way that introduces you to them for the first time, and it makes it accessible. And it's a great, complete story. Shows you plenty of wonder. Gives you that feeling of awe, and makes you want to come back for more. Here you go, Brian K. Vaughan's Ex Machina. Original story, original concept, banger of a first issue. Probably the last #1 that I've cared for from Mark Millar. I feel like a lot of his works have become just supremely derivative of everything in Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. And even when I saw this and I read it initially, I thought, you know, is this kind of a step beyond Watchmen? But then I read it, and then I reread it, and upon rereading, I thought, no, it's not. It's just Watchmen again. And he's kind of mastered the art of that. You know, if somebody were going to write a book of how to write comics by rewriting Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns over and over and over again to make millions of dollars, Mark Millar would be the one to do it. And I'm going to call him Millar. I don't care how he pronounces his name. Fear Agent #1. Original work, original hero, all encapsulated in one. I've even got the special limited edition ash can. Might have to put this baby up for sale one day. One #1 I cannot show you is my Invincible #1. I recently sold it. I decided to sell it when season 2 launched on Amazon, and I sold it for a lot. I sold it for about 4 times what I sold Deadpool's first appearance for. Now, the interesting thing about Invincible #1 is actually I would not put it in my stack of great first issues. Invincible did not get good until probably the end of the first year, like 12 issues into it. Honestly, I mean, that first issue, to me, he came across as just this kind of milquetoast, watered down Peter Parker Spider-Man figure. So it took a while to get going, and I actually didn't follow the first few issues. And once it got good and I heard it was good, then I went back to it. But the first issue didn't do it. Some more J. Michael Straczynski working characters that already exist. Squadron Supreme. Almost any of Frank Miller's Sin City #1s are great. They're not complete stories, now mind you. At least this one isn't. This was the last bit that he did, Hell and Back. But they almost always introduce a new character. They introduce a new section of Sin City, and they introduce whatever plot mysteries are going on that make you want to come back and follow it for more. Here we have Jodorowsky's Metabarons. Just fantastic concept. I later came to the understanding that this is basically a lot of his Doom concepts repackaged as Metabarons. And again, I'm all for it. It's not so much about swiping or stealing, but about inspiration and finding a way to represent those archetypal characters and stories and mythos of your own, from reflecting from within. And that's how we get new takes and new heroes and new things. And that's what I like. Why the Last Man #1 introduces his world. I'm not a huge fan of the entire concept. I followed it for a little while, but I was never as enamored of it as everyone else. But it's a good introduction to that world. Saga #1, I don't have the first issue, but again, just a great introduction to this entire world. A little bit more recent, actually, give kudos to Red Room #1 and Ed Piskor. I thought it was great. Introduces the entire world, introduces the concepts, puts you in there, and, you know, leaves you with enough to go, hey, you know, I wouldn't mind seeing more of this. So, good stuff. Radiant Black, one of the more recent superhero offerings, introduces you to an entirely new world. Does it in a really fun way. And here we go. Here's an odd #1. It's at the end, but it takes us all the way back to the beginning. It's Jack Kirby's kind of a refurbishing of his story of Star Warriors, starring Adam Starr and the Solar Legion, put together by Tom Scioli. So there you go. Lots of fun number ones to look at, to think about. That's about all for me right now. There's nobody in the chat, so I'm going to wrap this up. Please give me some feedback, especially regarding this particular topic, because I do want to follow up and kind of punch in a little bit closer on some first issues and take a look at what makes them work and how we can apply that to our own work. As always, please comment, like, subscribe, of course, tell people about the channel, become a member of the Comic Book Dojo, and I'll keep doing this for you. Even if you don't, I'll keep doing it regardless. And all the time I'm working on my own original graphic novel, which I will be more than happy to tell you about as it gets closer and closer. Of course, hit my link tree down below, and you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and all those other places here around the interwebs, and I'd love to hear from you. So thank you for watching. JT McRoberts out. We'll see you next time. Hey, keep on!